How long have you been with us, Melody? 29 years, is that right? David Langston's voice was a low, even purr, unnervingly casual as he leaned back into the plush confines of his executive leather chair. Its rich scent, a blend of cured hide and polish, seemed to fill the spacious, almost intimidatingly neat office. Sunlight, usually a welcome visitor, felt stark and revealing through the large windows, overlooking the St. Paul skyline. That's quite the accomplishment. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach, tightening with each measured syllable he spoke. My gaze, drawn by an instinct honed over decades, had already snagged on the nondescript manila folder resting squarely in the center of his otherwise immaculate, glass-topped desk. It looked deceptively benign. 29 years and 360, 2 days to be exact, I corrected him, my own voice betraying none of the trepidation that was now a distinct tremor deep within me. In all my nearly 30 years at Grantwell Manufacturing, a company that had grown from a regional powerhouse to a formidable national player during my tenure, I had never once been summoned to a director's office on a Friday afternoon. Not after 3 p.m., certainly not for a casual chat. Every fiber of my being, every logical processing circuit in my 61-year-old brain, screamed that something was profoundly, irrevocably wrong. I am Melody Reynolds. For the past 5 minutes, I was the senior compliance officer at one of St. Paul's largest and most respected manufacturing companies. My career, my very professional identity, had been meticulously built brick by painstaking brick within Grantwell's walls. For almost 3 decades, I had been the vigilant guardian of Grantwell's integrity, the unwavering enforcer of its adherence to legal parameters. It had been my singular mission to document every irregularity, to flag every deviation, and to stand firm, often against considerable internal pressure, when others sought expedient, easy solutions to complex, messy problems. I was the person who insisted on doing things by the book, even when the book was thick, convoluted, and inconvenient. My pension, the financial bedrock I had worked my entire adult life to secure, was scheduled to fully vest on Monday, just 3 days away. The very notion of retirement, a comfortable, dignified one, was within my grasp, shimmering like a mirage I could almost touch. David's hand moved, a swift, deliberate gesture. The manila folder slid across the polished, dark wood of his desk, stopping precisely before me, an unwelcome offering. Due to unforeseen budget constraints, Melody, we're letting you go. His eyes, cold and devoid of any genuine emotion, remained fixed on the folder, never once meeting mine. It was a cowardly act, a refusal to acknowledge the human impact of his words, effective immediately. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the perfectly balanced decor blurring around the edges. The entire space tilted, an internal seismic shift mirroring the sudden lurch in my world. Budget constraints. The words echoed, hollow and absurd, in the quiet office. Grantwell had just announced record profits last quarter, a glowing report that had landed on my desk just days prior, a testament to what I had, until now, believed was a thriving, well-managed enterprise. "This is your severance package," he continued, his voice still unnervingly calm, a finger, manicured and unblemished, tapping the folder with a sharp, almost percussive sound. "Sign by tomorrow, or you get nothing. HR will escort you to clean out your desk." It was a threat, bald and unvarnished, stripped of any corporate pretense. I should have felt a tidal wave of anger, a gut-wrenching shock that brought me to my knees. Perhaps even the desperate, humiliating urge to plead, to beg for those 3 days, for the validation of my years of loyalty. Instead, a strange, almost chilling calm washed over me. It wasn't resignation. It was a clarity, sharp and precise. This wasn't random. This wasn't some unfortunate, impersonal corporate downsizing. This was calculated. This was surgical. This was timed with a precision that bordered on malicious, designed to sever me from the very benefit I had worked for my entire adult life, just before it became undeniable. Thank you for the opportunity, I said quietly, the words surprising even myself with their steady cadence. My gaze, having previously settled on the folder, now lifted, not to David's averted face, but over the top of the folder itself. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The terms were already implied by the timing and the blatant threat. David finally looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, perhaps expecting tears, or a desperate, pleading outburst. But I had spent my entire career examining patterns, dissecting anomalies, connecting disparate pieces of information. And this pattern, this particular sequence of events, was as clear as the bright April day outside. I pushed back my chair, stood deliberately, smoothed the fabric of my navy skirt, a small, defiant gesture of control. Then, with what I hoped was every ounce of my 61 years of dignity intact, I turned and walked out. Janet from HR, her face etched with a mix of pity and discomfort, hovered awkwardly by my cubicle. The fluorescent lights of the open-plan office seemed unusually harsh, casting long, stark shadows as I began to pack the few personal items that had accumulated over decades. The framed photograph of my late husband, Thomas, his kind eyes smiling back at me, a silent reminder of a love that anchored me. The resilient potted plant, a slightly droopy philodendron, given to me by my daughter, Elizabeth, 15 years ago when she left for college, a verdant symbol of enduring connection, and the gleaming plaque, received with modest fanfare for 25 years of dedicated service to Grantwell. I didn't take much. Most of what truly mattered, my integrity, my memories, my principles, couldn't be crammed into a standard cardboard box. "I'm so terribly sorry, Melody," Janet whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes darting nervously toward the imposing figure of the security guard who waited, a silent sentinel, by the main entrance, ready to escort me out like a criminal. "This isn't right. It is what it is," I replied, my voice calm, almost detached. But inside, I knew better. This wasn't just not right. This was potentially profoundly illegal. The thought solidified with a cold, hard certainty. For the past 4 years, I had been meticulously documenting a growing list of financial irregularities within Grantwell. The pace had noticeably accelerated, almost alarmingly so, since David Langston's arrival just 6 months prior. I had sent detailed memos, concise and precise, up the chain of command. I had flagged suspicious patterns, presented irrefutable evidence of backdated reports, and even outlined potential regulatory breaches. Every single report, every careful memo, every piece of hard-won evidence had been dismissed, buried, or returned to me with vague instructions to focus on more pressing matters, or not to create unnecessary friction. It was a systematic suppression of the truth. As I walked through the brightly lit, seemingly innocuous lobby one last time, the security guard, a young man named Michael whom I'd often greeted by name, awkwardly held the door open for me. His face was flushed, clearly uncomfortable with his assigned role in this charade. "Have a good weekend, Mrs. Reynolds," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. I nodded politely, a small, tight smile playing on my lips. "I believe I will, Michael. I truly believe I will." The drive home felt profoundly surreal. 29 years. 29 years of unwavering dedication, of quiet, unflagging loyalty, concluded with nothing more than a manila folder filled with insulting terms, and a single cardboard box containing a few sentimental tokens. The soft drumming of April rain against my windshield was the only sound as I navigated the familiar streets of St. Paul, Minnesota. I passed the magnificent Cathedral of St. Paul, where Thomas and I had exchanged vows so many years ago, our lives entwined in promise. I drove beyond the tree-lined campus of the high school where our daughter, Elizabeth, had graduated with honors, her future bright and limitless. Finally, I turned onto the quiet street leading to the modest, well-tended home I had maintained on my own since becoming a widow 12 years earlier. My mind, usually so disciplined, replayed a montage of sacrifices. The countless dance recitals of Elizabeth's childhood I'd missed during those early years, working late to earn my promotions, believing I was building a secure future for us. Family vacations cut brutally short when a compliance emergency inexplicably arose. The endless evenings spent hunched over complex spreadsheets and dense legal documents, reviewing documentation that no one else had the patience, or perhaps the integrity, to examine. I had given Grantwell my prime years, my unwavering commitment, my very essence, all under the comforting delusion that my pension would eventually provide an ironclad security for Elizabeth and for myself. It was the promise of a well-earned, peaceful final chapter. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the engine hummed for a moment before I cut it, plunging the interior into a sudden, pregnant silence. I sat there, unmoving, allowing myself to truly feel the crushing weight of what had transpired. It was a composite of emotions: betrayal, profound disappointment, a deep sense of injustice, and a burgeoning, icy-cold anger. David Langston had been with the company for only 6 months. He had arrived trailing a reputation for streamlining operations, a corporate euphemism I now recognized to mean ruthlessly cutting costs at any price, often at the expense of ethics or long-term stability. I had known, with a chilling certainty, that our paths would eventually collide. Our most recent clash had been over his latest cost-cutting initiative, a scheme that blatantly skirted several critical regulatory requirements. I had refused to certify its compliance, a direct act of defiance. What I hadn't anticipated, what I had utterly underestimated, was how quickly and utterly ruthlessly he would move to eliminate me before I could pose a more significant threat. Inside my quiet home, the familiar comfort of my kitchen was a welcome anchor. I made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, the ritual a small act of self-soothing, and sat at my worn kitchen table, the silence amplifying the rustle of the papers as I finally, reluctantly, opened the severance package. The terms were beyond insulting. They were a brazen affront to my intelligence and my decades of service. 3 months' salary. That was it. In exchange, I was expected to waive all rights to future claims against the company, to forfeit my fully vested pension, and to relinquish any hope of healthcare continuation. There was no acknowledgement of nearly 3 decades of loyal, diligent service. Just a check and a cunningly crafted legal trap, designed with chilling precision to buy my silence, to ensure my immediate disappearance. The document stipulated a signature by 5 p.m. tomorrow, Saturday. They were clearly counting on fear, on desperation, to compel me to sign quickly, without consulting an attorney, without pausing to truly grasp the monumental implications. This wasn't standard corporate practice for a long-term employee. It was a targeted, aggressive effort to strip me of everything I had earned, everything I had worked for. I set the papers aside, the taste of betrayal bitter on my tongue. The tea, now cold, sat untouched. My mind, however, was no longer reeling. It was focusing, narrowing its considerable analytical power. I walked purposefully to my small home office, a sanctuary of order and meticulously kept records. Behind a neat row of family photo albums, nestled between faded vacation snapshots and framed certificates, sat a fireproof lockbox. It wasn't just a container, it was, as I had often thought, my quiet insurance policy. For the past 4 years, driven by an unwavering professional instinct that something was deeply amiss, I had been diligently, almost compulsively, bringing home copies of troubling financial documents. I had kept detailed, precise notes of suspicious conversations and saved every email that outlined patterns of potential misconduct. Not because I had ever planned to use them, not because I harbored any desire for confrontation, but simply because my professional intuition, honed over decades, had screamed at me that something wasn't right. I opened the heavy, secure box. The contents were arranged with the meticulousness of a seasoned compliance officer. Neatly labeled files, chronological order, loan applications rife with falsified data, Quarterly reports featuring manipulated figures, revenues inflated, expenses minimized. Emails explicitly instructing staff to backdate crucial quality control certifications for products already shipped. It was all there. A chilling chronicle of deception. Over 1,000 pages of irrefutable evidence, systematically compiled, demonstrating a pattern of systematic fraud that had not only existed, but had alarmingly accelerated under David Langston's recent direction. I had reported every single issue, followed every proper channel, only to be ignored, sidelined, or actively undermined. My hand reached for my phone, scrolling past dozens of contacts to a name I hadn't called in years, a number I had never thought I'd use under such circumstances. Gregory Santos. He had been Grantwell's chief financial officer before leaving years ago to join the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Gregory had always respected my diligence, my almost obsessive attention to detail, even when others within Grantwell had found it tedious or inconvenient. It's time. I thought, my finger hovering, then finally pressing down on his name. A profound sense of quiet resolution settled over me. The next morning, Saturday, I woke with a sense of purpose that felt exhilarating, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. After nearly 2 hours on the phone with Gregory the previous evening, my path forward was crystal clear. He had listened intently, his questions sharp and precise, as I outlined the unfolding situation and described the mountain of documentation I had painstakingly collected. His response had been measured, devoid of dramatics, yet infused with an undeniable, quiet resolve. Melody, based on what you're describing, this isn't just wrongful termination. This goes far beyond. Grantwell could be facing serious securities violations. The timing with your pension. That's just the tip of the iceberg. He had patiently explained the robust whistleblower protections available through the SEC, and had swiftly arranged for me to meet with his team first thing Monday morning. Don't sign anything, Melody, he had cautioned, his voice firm, and secure those documents somewhere absolutely safe. Don't let them out of your sight. I spent Saturday morning immersed in the methodical work of making copies of everything. My dining room table, usually reserved for family meals, became a temporary command center. I organized the evidence chronologically, created a detailed index, and compiled executive summaries for the most damning findings. The work was therapeutic, a structured activity that kept my mind laser-focused, preventing the raw anger, the sting of betrayal, and the profound hurt from overwhelming me. By noon, I had meticulously prepared 3 identical, thick packages, one destined for the SEC, a second for my secure personal records, and a third, a strategic safeguard. That would serve as powerful leverage if, or more likely when, it became necessary. My phone, usually quiet on weekends, began to ring with an almost alarming frequency throughout the day. It was Janet from HR, her initial messages laced with concern, quickly followed by escalating urgency. Then David Langston himself, his voice tense, an uncharacteristic edge of desperation seeping into his tone. Melody, we really need that paperwork signed today. I can come by and pick it up if that helps. Later, the company's general counsel, a man named Robert Jenkins, left a message, his tone far more direct, subtly menacing. Ms. Reynolds, it's imperative we receive your signed agreement before close of business. Failure to comply could jeopardize your severance package entirely. Their rapidly mounting desperation was a stark confirmation of what I already suspected. They knew they were vulnerable. They knew the dam was about to break, and they wanted my silence secured, locked down, before the weekend ended and the truth could seep out. At precisely 4:30 p.m., the doorbell chimed, a surprisingly cheerful sound given the circumstances. Through the peephole, I saw him, David Langston, standing on my modest front porch, his expensive, tailor-made suit looking conspicuously out of place in my quiet, unassuming neighborhood. He looked impatient, agitated. I didn't answer. I simply stood there, a silent, invisible observer, my heart thrumming with a quiet defiance. "Melody, I know you're in there," he called, his voice muffled by the solid wood. "This is ridiculous. Just sign the papers and we can all move on." I watched unmoving, as he eventually slipped a large envelope into my mailbox, his shoulders slumped in a gesture of defeat I hadn't thought him capable of. He then turned and retreated to his sleek, luxury sedan, pulling away without a backward glance. Only then did I retrieve the envelope. Inside, as expected, was another copy of the same contemptuous agreement, this one adorned with a hastily scrawled, bold handwritten note, "Final opportunity. Signed by 9 a.m. Monday." It was a last desperate gamble. That evening my daughter, Elizabeth, called for our weekly chat. We spoke every Sunday, a cherished ritual, a tether across the miles. Her voice, usually light and brimming with news from Denver, tightened with concern. "Mom, what's going on? You sound different." I considered, for a fleeting moment, downplaying the situation, softening the blow. But Elizabeth, fiercely intelligent and perceptive, deserved the unvarnished truth. "I was terminated yesterday," I said simply, plainly. A stunned silence stretched between us. Then, her voice, filled with an indignant disbelief, rose slightly. "What? But you're just days away from your full pension?" "They can't do that?" "They did," I replied, the words stark. "But don't worry, sweetheart. I'm handling it. Do you need me to come home?" Her immediate reaction was to protect, to offer support. "I can be on a flight from Denver tomorrow morning." "No, sweetheart," I said, a soft smile touching my lips, warmed by her love. "Stay put. I've got this covered." My voice carried a conviction that surprised even myself. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room as the twilight deepened, painting the room in shades of charcoal and purple. My thoughts drifted to Monday's impending meeting with the SEC. For years, decades even, I had meticulously tried to address these festering issues internally. I had truly believed in the system, in the inherent integrity of Grantwell as an institution. I had been loyal, discreet, and unfailingly professional, even when the gnawing suspicion of serious wrongdoing had grown almost unbearable. But Grantwell, through its leadership, had made its choice. It had chosen corruption over compliance, self-interest over integrity. And now I would make mine. I would not be signing their agreement. I would not be silenced. And most importantly, I would not allow them to discard 3 decades of my life, my diligent work, my profound loyalty, without consequence. The wait for Monday, for the dawn of accountability, felt interminable. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, invigorating clarity I hadn't felt in years, perhaps not since Thomas had been alive. A lightness, a sense of righteous purpose, settled deep within me. I dressed carefully in the navy suit I reserved for my most important meetings, its crisp lines a silent statement of intent. My documentation, now meticulously organized and indexed, was placed securely within my well-worn leather briefcase. I drove downtown, the familiar urban landscape of St. Paul rolling past, toward the imposing federal building, where Gregory had arranged our meeting. The weight of what I was about to do, the sheer magnitude of challenging a multi-billion-dollar corporation, sat heavily on my shoulders. But it was not a crushing weight. It was a firm, grounding pressure, imbued with an undeniable sense of rightness. The SEC offices were understated, almost austere, yet undeniably imposing. Glass partitions separated quiet workspaces, and hushed conversations drifted from behind closed doors, creating an atmosphere of serious, focused work. Gregory met me in the lobby, his familiar face etched with a few more lines of experience, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence and calm diligence I remembered. "Melody," he said warmly, extending his hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, of course." "It's good to see you, Gregory," I replied, a genuine smile touching my lips. "Thank you for taking this so seriously." He led me down a quiet corridor to a spacious conference room. already set for our discussion. Two other investigators were waiting: Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney whose sharp, analytical gaze immediately assessed me, and James Weston, a forensic accountant whose quiet demeanor belayed an obvious keen attention to detail. Both greeted me with professional courtesy, their respect palpable. "Mrs. Reynolds," Angela began, her voice calm and authoritative, her gaze steady and direct. "Before we begin, I want to confirm that you fully understand the process we're initiating today. Once you share this information with us, once we review these documents, an investigation becomes official. There's no turning back, no opportunity to retract your statements or withdraw your evidence." "I understand completely," I affirmed, my voice steady, my conviction absolute. For the next 3 intensive hours, I systematically walked them through my documentation, a comprehensive narrative of Grantwell's slow descent into financial impropriety. I detailed the initial, almost imperceptible irregular financial reporting I had first noticed 4 years ago, the subtle discrepancies where shipping manifests didn't quite match invoices, the first quiet alarm bells that had begun to ring in my mind. I presented evidence of quality control certifications that had been brazenly backdated after products had already been shipped, a shocking disregard for safety and regulatory standards. I traced the insidious pattern of revenue manipulation that had intensified in recent quarters, particularly after David Langston's arrival. My meticulous notes, my archived emails, my detailed reports, they spoke volumes, presenting an undeniable, chronological account of corporate malfeasance. James Weston, the forensic accountant, examined the financial documents with growing concern, his brow furrowed in a deep frown. "These discrepancies aren't small, Mrs. Reynolds," he noted, his voice low, almost a whisper of disbelief. "Based on this, the company has been systematically overstating revenues by at least 18% for the past 2 years. That's not just a miscalculation. That's securities fraud. Internally, did you report these issues?" Angela asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "Multiple times," I confirmed, pushing copies of my comprehensive internal memos and email exchanges across the table. Each time, I was told the issues were being addressed, or that I was misinterpreting the data. Sometimes, I was simply told to focus on more pressing matters. When David Langston joined 6 months ago, my concerns, my reports, my very existence, it seemed, began being rerouted to his office. From there, they simply disappeared entirely. Gregory leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze piercing. "And you believe your termination was directly related to these reports?" "Without question," I stated, my voice unwavering. "The timing alone, 3 days before my pension fully vested, makes it obvious. It was too precise to be coincidence. But more than that, I had recently flagged several major, critical issues with David's latest cost-cutting initiative. He needed me gone. He needed me out of the way before I could escalate those concerns further." As our meeting concluded, Angela outlined the next steps. "We'll need your formal sworn statement, Mrs. Reynolds," she explained. "Once that's complete, we'll officially begin our investigation. Typically, these investigations remain confidential until we determine whether enforcement action is warranted." "How long will that take?" I asked, a pragmatic concern. "It varies," she replied, a thoughtful pause. "But given the comprehensive documentation you've provided, and the clear pattern of misconduct you've identified, we may move very quickly on this one. You've given us a substantial head start." I hadn't even returned to my quiet St. Paul home when my phone rang. It was Janet from HR, her voice trembling, almost frantic. "Melody, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. David's been locked in his office all morning. And there are rumors about SEC investigators contacting our general counsel." So it had begun. Faster than even I had anticipated. The SEC, true to Angela's word, must have made immediate, forceful contact with Grantwell's legal team. "I'm not surprised, Janet," I said, my voice calm, almost detached, a stark contrast to her palpable anxiety. "Did you?" Janet hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Melody, did you report something?" "I simply did what I should have done years ago, Janet," I replied, the truth a quiet, unyielding force. "Then," I pressed, "what's happening with my pension paperwork? And my termination?" "That's why I'm calling," she stammered, clearly flustered. "The executive committee is reviewing your termination. They've put everything on hold until further notice. Everything is up in the air." An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed the name William Hargrove, the formidable chairman of Grantwell's board. A man whose presence I had always found intimidating. A man who had barely acknowledged my existence during our few previous, fleeting interactions. "Ms. Reynolds," he began, his typically confident, booming voice sounding strangely strained, an uncharacteristic tremor in his tone. "We seem to have a situation that requires your input. Would you be willing to come to the office tomorrow morning to discuss matters?" The invitation, so recently denied, now extended with thinly veiled urgency, was almost comical. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Hargrove," I replied, my voice cool and even, devoid of any hint of emotion. "Any discussions regarding this matter, particularly given its evolving nature, should include my attorney, and potentially representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm sure you understand." The silence on the other end of the line was profound, a vacuum of unspoken realization. Finally, he cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. "I see. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal." Then, his tone suggested a dawning comprehension of the new power dynamic. As I hung up, I felt no surge of satisfaction, no triumphant glee. Only a deep, pervasive wariness at the sheer necessity of it all. I had never, not once in my career, wanted to be a whistleblower. I had only ever wanted to do my job with unwavering integrity, to contribute meaningfully to my company, and to retire with the quiet security I had painstakingly earned. But Grantwell, through its callous actions, had forced my hand. And now, we would all face the consequences. My phone continued to ring relentlessly throughout the evening. A relentless chorus of colleagues seeking information, executives attempting frantic damage control. I answered none of them. The time for private conversations, for discreet internal resolutions, had passed. Now, everything would happen in the harsh, revealing light of public scrutiny. By Wednesday morning, the storm had fully broken. Local business publications ran screaming headlines about an SEC investigation into Grantwell Manufacturing, the bold type a stark declaration of impending crisis. The company's stock, once a symbol of stability, had gone into a tailspin, plummeting with alarming speed. Financial analysts, who had only days ago lauded David Langston's efficiency measures, now openly questioned the integrity of Grantwell's entire financial reporting structure. I received a formal letter from Grantwell's legal department, a transparent attempt to mitigate damages, coming far too late. It officially withdrew my termination notice and placed me on administrative leave with full benefits, pending an internal review. The absurdity was not lost on me. At 10 a.m. that morning, my attorney, Barbara Reynolds, no relation, a coincidence that amused us both, accompanied me back to Grantwell's imposing headquarters. The same security guard who had so awkwardly escorted me out just 5 days prior now nodded respectfully, holding the heavy glass doors open with a polite deference as we entered. The atmosphere within the building was palpably tense, a thick, suffocating cloud of anxiety. Employees huddled in whispered conversations, their voices hushed, their eyes wide with fear and speculation. They stopped abruptly, falling silent and scattering, as Barbara and I passed, their gazes following us, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. We were escorted directly to the main boardroom, a cavernous space where major decisions, often hidden from the rank and file, were made. William Hargrove, The chairman waited there, looking as if he had aged years in just a few days, his face pale and drawn. He was flanked by the company's outside counsel, a stern-faced woman in an impeccable suit, and 3 other board members, their expressions a carefully calibrated mix of concern and defensiveness. David Langston was conspicuously, thankfully, absent. "Thank you for coming, Miss Reynolds," William began, his voice still strained, lacking its usual gravitas. "We've initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into the concerns you've raised." Barbara, a formidable advocate, spoke before I could even formulate a response. Her voice was crisp and clear, cutting through the corporate platitudes. "Let's be clear about something, Mr. Hargrove. Ms. Reynolds didn't suddenly raise these concerns after her termination. She meticulously documented and reported them repeatedly, over a period of 4 years, exactly as her job required her to do. The company's decision to actively ignore those reports, to dismiss her legitimate warnings, and then to terminate her just days before her pension vested, speaks volumes about Grantwell's priorities and its previous leadership's culpability." William shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze darting around the room. "Yes? Well, that's precisely part of what we're investigating now. I want to personally assure Ms. Reynolds that her termination has been officially rescinded. We consider her an employee in good standing, with all benefits intact, including my pension." I interjected, cutting directly to the heart of the matter, my gaze fixed on his. "Of course," he replied, perhaps a little too quickly, a hint of desperation in his eagerness to appease. "In fact, we're prepared to offer you a consulting role after your retirement, which you can begin immediately if you wish. We deeply value your expertise and my client isn't making any decisions today, Mr. Hargrove." Barbara interrupted, her voice firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Subject lined, "Any discussion about future arrangements should be preceded by a full and transparent accounting of precisely how her previous, repeatedly submitted concerns were suppressed for so long." The meeting continued for another draining hour. The board members, now acutely aware of their precarious position, desperately attempted to distance themselves from both David Langston's actions and the pervasive financial irregularities I had so meticulously documented. They painted themselves as innocent victims of misinformation, expressing shock and profound disappointment at the apparent misconduct, as if it had been entirely external to their knowledge. I remained mostly silent throughout, allowing Barbara to handle the legal maneuvering. Observing their body language, the nervous fidgeting, the forced expressions of concern. These were people I had worked alongside for years, individuals I had passed in the hallways, exchanged polite greetings within the elevators. Yet, they had never truly noticed me, not my work, not my warnings, not the integrity I embodied. Now, under the glare of imminent scandal, they couldn't look away, their expressions a fascinating, unsettling mix of fear, calculation, and a newfound, almost grudging respect. As Barbara and I prepared to leave, gathering our documents, William made one final, desperate appeal. "Melody," he said, his voice tinged with an almost pleading note, "we're hoping you might consider speaking with the SEC investigators about the corrective actions we're now taking. Your support, your public endorsement, would be invaluable to the company during this difficult time." I looked at him directly for the first time since entering the room, my gaze unwavering, holding his. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, measured, but imbued with the weight of years of disregarded warnings. "Mr. Hargrove, I have spent 29 years dedicated to this company's compliance. During that time, I filed 47 major reports documenting serious irregularities. I sent 16 detailed memos specifically addressing the very issues now under investigation. I requested 9 separate meetings with executive leadership to discuss these critical concerns, of which only 2 were actually granted, and neither of those meetings resulted in any meaningful action whatsoever. I paused, allowing the numbers to hang in the silent, tense air of the boardroom. At what point in that history? I continued, my voice cutting cleanly through the silence. Did I have your support? The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Not a single person spoke. I will cooperate fully with both your internal investigation and the SEC. I continued, my voice gaining a quiet power. But I will be speaking only to the facts, as I always have. Whether those facts support or damage Grantwell will depend entirely on what you do next, Mr. Hargrove, not on what you say in this room. As Barbara and I walked out, leaving the stunned board members behind, she leaned in, a slight smile touching her lips. That, she whispered, was perfectly stated. It wasn't until we reached the parking lot, the cool April air a balm on my face, that I allowed myself to take a deep, shuddering breath. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation, sharpening my resolve and steadying my voice, began to slowly fade, leaving me drained but remarkably clear-headed. This wasn't victory, not yet. This was merely the beginning of accountability. What happens now? I asked Barbara as we stood beside our cars, the sound of city traffic a distant hum. Now. She smiled slightly, a glint of steel in her eyes. Now they scramble to save what they can while the investigation continues. But make no mistake, Melody, they're terrified of you. I shook my head slowly, a faint, almost wistful smile touching my lips. They're not terrified of me, Barbara. I corrected her gently. They're terrified of the truth. There's a difference. Barbara nodded thoughtfully, her gaze steady. There is indeed. And that difference, Melody, is why you'll ultimately win this, regardless of how it plays out. As I drove home, the setting sun casting long, golden shadows across the familiar streets, I found myself wondering what Thomas would have thought of all this. My late husband had always been my quiet champion, the unwavering rock who had always encouraged my meticulous nature. Even when others, particularly at work, had found it frustrating, even obsessive. Your attention to detail isn't a quirk, Melody, he'd often say, his eyes twinkling with affection. It's a superpower. Perhaps he had been right all along. By Friday, exactly 1 week after my summary termination, the story had escalated into a full-blown corporate scandal, a daily headline dominating business news. The SEC had issued formal, sweeping requests for information from Grantwell, signaling a serious and far-reaching inquiry. An internal memo, leaked to the press from William Hargrove himself, announced David Langston's immediate suspension pending investigation, a carefully worded but damning indictment. The company's stock, already volatile, had dropped nearly 30%, triggering panic among major investors and partners. I was no longer just Melody Reynolds, the overlooked compliance officer. Business journals, now ravenous for details, referred to me as the whistleblower and the woman who exposed Grantwell. The sudden, intense public attention was uncomfortable, almost disorienting, but I remained steadfastly focused on the official process, working closely with the SEC investigators, who had now established temporary offices in a separate building near Grantwell's headquarters. The initial evidence I had provided had been the key that unlocked many doors, but the ongoing investigation was revealing even more troubling, deeply ingrained patterns of misconduct that I, even with my privileged access, hadn't been able to fully uncover. Gregory called to update me on their progress, his voice grave, the professional detachment he usually maintained slipping slightly. Melody, it's worse than we thought, he said. The financial manipulation goes back at least 5 years, predating Langston's arrival. He certainly accelerated it, made it more brazen, but he didn't start it. It was already systemic. I suspected as much. I replied, a chilling confirmation of my long-held, unspoken fears. There were certain anomalies, certain authorities that I couldn't fully document because I couldn't access executive-level reports. I always had a feeling there was a deeper layer. Well, we can access them now. Gregory continued, a grim satisfaction in his voice. And they tell a story of systematic, long-term fraud, meticulously designed to inflate the company's value, to deceive investors. The board is claiming ignorance, of course, but at least 3 members had to have known. They signed off on key transactions. They approved falsified numbers. Their fingerprints are all over this. This news, the vindication of my suspicions, should have left me feeling triumphant. Instead, it left me with a profound sense of hollowness. The company I had dedicated my entire professional life to, the institution I had believed in and protected with fierce loyalty, had been corrupted at levels even I hadn't fully comprehended. The very people I had trusted with my concerns, the individuals I had believed were allies in upholding integrity, had in fact been actively participating in the very fraud I was reporting. That afternoon, I received another call from Elizabeth. Her voice was tight with a barely controlled anger. "Mom, have you seen the news?"
"They're trying to discredit you. It's disgusting."
I hadn't. I had deliberately avoided media coverage, choosing instead to focus my energy and attention on the official proceedings, on the objective facts. "What are they saying?" I asked calmly, bracing myself. "That Grantwell executive Langston gave an interview claiming you had performance issues and were bitter about being passed over for promotion." She fumed. "He's trying to make it sound like you're retaliating because of personal grievances, that you're just a disgruntled employee." I wasn't surprised. It was a predictable, desperate defense strategy: attack the whistleblower's credibility rather than address the damning allegations. "It doesn't matter, Elizabeth," I assured her, my voice firm. "The evidence speaks for itself. My performance reviews have been exemplary for 29 years. They can't rewrite that history now." But David was trying to do exactly that. By that evening, several major news outlets, eager for a sensational angle, had picked up his narrative, questioning my motives, and suggesting I had deliberately manipulated documentation to frame him. It was a desperate move from a desperate man, but it still stung a sharp, unpleasant jab to see my integrity, the very bedrock of my identity, questioned so publicly. Barbara called immediately, her voice stern. "Don't respond to any of it, Melody," she advised. "Don't engage. The SEC will issue a statement tomorrow clarifying your whistleblower status and the absolute credibility of your evidence. Let the official channels handle this. Publicly refuting him only gives his lies more oxygen." I wasn't planning to respond. I told her, my voice thoughtful, "But I am going to do something else." The next morning, with a renewed sense of purpose, I drove to my local bank and asked to speak with the manager, Tracy Ferguson. I had known Tracy for years. She handled most of Grantwell's local banking transactions, a familiar, trustworthy face. "Melody." She greeted me warmly, her eyes wide with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "I've been following the news. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Tracy," I replied, offering a reassuring smile. "But I need access to my safe deposit box." Inside the bank's private room, the heavy, metallic smell of the vault clinging to the air. I opened the box. Tucked away behind some old bonds and a few pieces of forgotten jewelry, I removed a sealed, nondescript envelope I had placed there almost 3 years prior. It contained copies of email exchanges between David Langston's predecessor and 2 of the board members, discussing thinly veiled strategies to manage financial appearances. During a critical acquisition period, I had stumbled upon these accidentally while archiving old emails, a subtle anomaly that had caught my ever-vigilant eye. Something, a deep, professional instinct, had told me to secure them separately from my other documentation, to treat them as a distinct, potentially significant piece of the puzzle. I hadn't included these in my initial report to the SEC because they weren't directly related to Langston's immediate, more egregious actions. But now, with David desperately attempting to undermine my credibility by claiming I was acting out of personal bitterness, These emails provided crucial, irrefutable context. They proved that the problematic practices, the culture of deception, long predated my concerns about him specifically. I called Gregory immediately, my fingers almost vibrating with the significance of what I held. "I have something you need to see," I told him, my voice tight with quiet certainty. "It changes the narrative completely." As I drove to meet him, navigating the familiar morning traffic, I felt no sense of satisfaction, no personal vindication. Only a profound, unshakable certainty that the full, unvarnished truth would now emerge, regardless of who it implicated. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning, exactly 10 days after my termination, and a mere 7 days after I had first contacted the SEC. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be present to know precisely what was unfolding within Grantwell's hallowed executive halls. The additional, damning documentation I had provided, particularly the pre-Langston emails, had dramatically accelerated the investigation, swiftly implicating not just David, but multiple board members in a years-long pattern of systemic financial manipulation. Gregory called me from outside the meeting room, his voice crackling with an almost palpable energy. "It's chaos in there, Melody," he reported, a note of grim satisfaction in his tone. "The SEC enforcement team just presented their preliminary findings, backed by your latest evidence. 3 board members have already resigned from the meeting room. Langston is trying to claim he was just following established practices, but no one's buying it anymore." By noon, Grantwell issued a terse, carefully worded press release, announcing an immediate leadership restructuring and pledging full cooperation with regulatory authorities. The statement, stripped of any genuine apology, confirmed the resignation of 4 board members, including William Hargrove, and the termination of David Langston, for cause. The company's stock, already battered by the scandal, dropped another 12%, a financial hemorrhage that mirrored the erosion of its reputation. That afternoon, my phone rang again. It was Patricia Vance, the former chief operating officer, a woman who had always treated me with professional respect, if not warmth, during our infrequent interactions. She had been quietly sidelined by David Langston during his reign, a casualty of his streamlining. "Melody," she began, her voice wary but firm. "I won't waste time with pleasantries. The company is in crisis, a deep, fundamental crisis, and you're at the very center of it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you were the only one who consistently did what was right." She paused, then continued. "The new interim board, comprised of independent directors, is working to stabilize the company. They believe you are crucial to this process." She slid a sleek, pristine folder across the table, eerily similar in its pristine presentation to the termination paperwork David had presented just 11 days earlier. The irony was almost too sharp to bear. "This officially rescinds your termination, reinstates your employment retroactively, and confirms your full pension vesting," she explained, her gaze direct. "It also includes an additional, substantial compensation package recognizing the difficulties you've experienced and the profound service you've rendered." I opened the folder, my fingers tracing the crisp, official paper. The compensation package was staggering, a sum equal to 5 years of my salary, full health care coverage for life, and a formal, signed apology from the newly formed independent board. It was an unprecedented act of corporate contrition. "We're also establishing a completely new corporate ethics and compliance division," Patricia continued, her voice gaining a renewed energy. "It will report directly to the independent board. We'd like you to help design it, to build it from the ground up, as a consultant after your retirement. Your experience, your vision is invaluable." I closed the folder, the weight of the paper surprisingly heavy in my hands. I didn't comment on the offer, simply absorbed its implications. "And David Langston?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. the board members involved in the long-term manipulation. Patricia's expression hardened, a flicker of cold justice in her eyes. Criminal charges are expected, Melody. The company will not be defending them. Grantwell will cooperate fully with the authorities in their prosecution. Justice, it seemed, had finally, undeniably arrived at Grantwell Manufacturing. 6 months later, I sat quietly in a federal courtroom, observing the proceedings with a detached, almost academic interest. Before me, David Langston, once so arrogant and imposing, now looked diminished, a shadow of his former self in his dark, ill-fitting suit. Beside him, 2 former board members, their faces ashen, entered guilty pleas to serious securities fraud charges. The man who had so casually, so ruthlessly ended my career, now bore the unmistakable mark of defeat. Our eyes met briefly as he turned to leave the courtroom, a flicker of recognition passing between us. Not of me specifically, perhaps, but of what I represented, the undeniable consequences of his actions, personified. The Grantwell scandal, in its dramatic unfolding, had become a widely studied case in corporate governance failures and, conversely, the crucial, often underestimated role of internal compliance. I had politely declined the consulting position with the reorganized company. My mission, I realized, was larger than a single corporation. Instead, I chose to dedicate my time and expertise to working with regulatory agencies, helping to develop better, more robust whistleblower protocols. My story, amplified by the media attention, had already inspired other compliance officers, silent guardians in their own companies, to come forward with their own meticulously documented evidence of corporate wrongdoing, creating a powerful ripple effect across various industries. The SEC, recognizing my crucial role, had awarded me a substantial whistleblower payment, 15% of the penalties assessed against Grantwell. Combined with my fully reinstated pension and the generous settlement package, I now had more financial security than I had ever imagined possible. A true testament to the power of unwavering principles. With this newfound freedom, I established a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance, a tribute to the values I held dear, naming it, fittingly, after Thomas. Elizabeth, recognizing the shift in my life and her own desire for connection, had relocated to St. Paul, bringing my 2 beautiful grandchildren with her. We spent weekends together at my new lakeside home, building new memories. Laughter echoing through the room's memories I had sacrificed, missed, during all those long, arduous hours dedicated to Grantwell. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple over the serene water, Elizabeth asked a question that caught me off guard, her voice soft but earnest. "Mom," she began, "do you regret staying at Grantwell all those years, given how it ended? Given all you went through?" I considered this carefully, the full weight of the past few months, indeed the past 3 decades, settling upon me. My answer came slowly, deliberately. "No," I finally said, my gaze fixed on the shimmering water. "I regret that it was necessary to expose them. I regret that my warnings were ignored, and that I had to fight so hard for justice. But I don't regret my work there. Integrity isn't just about being honest when it's easy, Elizabeth. It's about maintaining your principles, upholding your values, especially when it costs you something." Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully, a quiet understanding dawning in her eyes. "You taught me that, she murmured, not with words but by example. That, I realized, was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all. Not the public vindication, not the unexpected financial security, but the profound knowledge that my choices, my unwavering stand, had shown my daughter what it truly meant to live with integrity, to stand firm in your values, regardless of the daunting consequences. As for Grantwell Manufacturing, the company had survived, albeit greatly diminished and forever marked by the scandal. The new leadership, now under intense scrutiny, had implemented stringent compliance protocols and transparent reporting practices. They still sent me their annual reports, perhaps as a reminder of their fall, perhaps as an unspoken apology. I read them carefully, noting the improved practices, the genuine commitment to ethics now, with a quiet, professional satisfaction. Some might view my story as one of revenge, a long, simmering retaliation. But I have never viewed it that way. I simply did what I had always done, documented the facts, reported the truth, and stood by my findings, regardless of the personal cost. The only difference, this time, was that finally, irrevocably, others were forced to listen.